I have as my guest one of the top radio personalities in America. In fact, in the year 2000, he was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame. He's won numerous awards in his long career, and he's hosted many syndicated oldies radio shows, including currently American Gold and Rock and Roll's Greatest Hits. It's Dick Bartley.
Hey,
and Dick, it's certainly great to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
All right, great. Now, if you could talk about where you grew up and what got you into radio.
Well, radio was an interest of mine from the very, very early days, like just about everybody who's made it a career. It impacted you fairly early on. I lived in upstate New York, Syracuse, and we lived about a quarter mile from one of the great top 40 stations in that town in that day, WNDR, and I could see their antenna array out my window. So I hung around there after school once I figured out what was going on, and got to meet some of the DJs, and took a record home occasionally. And so, from a very young age, I would bicycle over there after school and hang out. And then we moved to Virginia in the mid-'60s, and again, I was very close to the local rock and roll radio station, so I started hanging out there. And it just seemed natural that I got my first part-time job at a radio station when I was a senior in high school.
Now, your early radio journeys, you just talked about, it took you through the state of Virginia.
Yeah, I lived in Virginia for a number of years. I was in Lynchburg during my junior high and high school years, and then Charlottesville, where the University of Virginia is, which I attended during college years, and for a couple years after that, I worked radio in Charlottesville.
Okay. Then you moved on to the third largest market in America, in Chicago. What brought you to the Windy City?
Well, it was a big jump, that's for sure, a dizzying jump, and it took me a while to get my feet firmly settled on the ground. There was an opening I noticed back in the mid-'70s when I was in Charlottesville and reading the Gavin Report every week in the job openings. There was a position open at WBBM-FM in Chicago, which was doing soft rock at the time, or the mellow sound was the format. And they were looking for a music director and afternoon drive guy, and week after week after week, the ad was still there. And when I first saw it, I thought, well, I got no shot. A guy in an unranked market like Charlottesville, Virginia, jump into Chicago doesn't happen. But after seeing the ad, repeat week after week after week, I thought, I got nothing to lose. So I sent the guy an air check, and what there was of a resume, I was on my second radio station or third radio station at that point. And they called me in for an interview, and I got the job.
How about that? And Chicago is where I first heard you when you started Solid Gold Saturday Night, America's Request Oldies Show. Right. Talk about how this show came about and how you got into syndication.
Well, I was doing local radio in Chicago, WFYR, which was owned by RKO General Tire. And I had come over after 3 years at CBS, the WBBM-FM station I mentioned, come over to the RKO station in '78. And in the spring of '80, we launched a show called a local Chicago Saturday Night Request Oldies show called Saturday Night Oldies. We were doing format on the station, which was an AC. Actually, it was called Great Oldies and More, but the format was adult contemporary. And on Saturday night, we were just doing straight format. We were playing Barry Manilow and Anne Murray and whatever, Neil Diamond, whatever was in the, the format at that time. And I said to the general manager, we're playing oldies in the format, what was it, once a quarter hour or something like that. I said, how about we do a dedicated oldies show on Saturday night? And he looked at the ratings, and we had like a 0 Saturday night, 7 to midnight doing format. It was a very low number. And he said, well, just, you know what, just don't lose the license. Do what you want. And Dave Martin, who was the program director at that time, I was doing the Saturday afternoon shift, and Dave started out hosting Saturday Night Oldies, and he did it for a month or two, and then handed it off to me in May of 1980. And so I took it and ran with it, and it was, just a dream come true to be able to play that music back to back to back to back to back without stuffing in the contemporary stuff in between. And long story short, the ratings were phenomenal. We went from virtually a 0, a fractional share, to a 26 share.
Wow!
In 2 books.
That's fabulous,
right? And as our WFYR was owned by RKO, they were just starting the RKO radio network, and the VP of programming, Dan Griffin, called me one day and said, this Saturday night thing you're doing, do you think it would work on a national basis? And I said, yeah. I think it would.
Take it.
Yeah. So
There you
we
go.
started on the network in January of '82 on RKO.
I remember hearing you do that Saturday night Request Oldies show when I was growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, on Coil Radio 1290.
Right. That was an affiliate a long time ago.
Yes,
yeah.
it was, and I was actually interning at Coil in the early 1980s when you were hosting that show on Saturday nights. Now, other shows would follow in the oldies realm for you, including another syndicated show. This was called Solid Gold Scrapbook. Now, this show aired on my former station in the Antelope Valley market of Southern California. How'd this show come about, Solid Gold Scrapbook?
Well, to be honest with you, we did a special Solid Gold Scrapbook. It was a 1 hour devoted to each year, covering, and I think this was probably done in the early 80s, so it would have been, late 60s to maybe early 60s to early 80s, a 20-hour special. We did that for the RKO Radio Network. They liked it and said, can we do this theme kind of programming, countdown/theme programming, an hour a day? Because the big thing in syndicated network radio then was access to Monday through Friday strip feature type shows. So that was the hot new topic. So we took what I did on the Saturday night show. The music library was the same, but we added context and we added a lot of interviews and a lot of news drop-ins, and we put the songs in context, and it's a completely different presentation of really great music, and I thought it worked very, very well. The stations were able to run it an hour a day. A lot of them were looking for a noon to 1 o'clock lunchtime oldies thing. And so this fit that need. And then on the weekend, they could string all 5 episodes together and have a 5-hour block on Sunday morning or
That's
Sunday
exactly
night.
what my station did. They did it on Sunday afternoons from noon to 5.
Yeah.
They ran all 5 hours.
Yeah. And all 5 hours were, even though they played on a Monday through Friday basis on many stations, they were programmed as a 5-hour whole, so that the song separation and rotations made sense when you heard it as a block.
You know, one thing that's very unique about you, Dick, is that you're very well-rounded in the industry, being a creator, producer, host, and writer. Talk about wearing a lot of hats.
Well, I've always felt that I know how to write the way I talk, and so that's why I am my own writer. I think I have, and not that another professional writer couldn't do that. I would certainly love to have a full-time professional writer if I could afford one, but I have always written my own material just because I know how I sound, and I know what sounds real and conversational and what connects with the listening audience. And I also have, a passion for that music and that time. I absolutely love the music of the top 40 era and the people who made it and the stories behind it, and so have, made myself into some kind of a quasi-expert on that, and I feel that a lot of that comes out in my writing, too.
What would you say are the years of the top 40 era? Give me, what are the golden years of the top 40 era, would you say?
Well, there are many, many different definitions. As time goes on, what we define as oldies or top 40 is impacted by the needs of advertisers. So, in the last 5 or 10 years, the trend, of course, has been to move the population bubble up and try to keep it on track with 25 to 49-year-olds or, 30 to 50 or whatever. So, whereas when we first started doing the Saturday night show in Chicago, it was mid-50s to early 70s. It was rock around the clock to Crocodile Rock.
There you go.
That's what it was.
Yeah, there you go.
But now it's very different, and for some years now, we haven't played any music prior to when the Beatles showed up.
Okay.
So we start in the mid-60s, and we go to the mid-80s.
So it's something like, I Want to Hold Your Hand to Like a Virgin, or something like that.
I don't have Madonna in the library, but Do You Believe in Love, Huey Lewis?
Yeah, absolutely. That was in 1982. I was going to say, I Want to Hold Your Hand to Centerfold, but I thought I'd go a little bit further up in the 80s.
It's so now, instead of being a 60s-centric format, it's with late 50s and early 70s as side dishes. It's now a 70s-centric format with 60s and 80s as the side dishes.
Then eventually along came 2 shows that debuted in the early 1990s that you're currently hosting, and they're heard around the nation. American Gold, which is aired on a radio station that I worked on the air at in the Inland Empire of Southern California, and another show that at one time aired there also called Rock and Roll's Greatest Hits. Talk about these shows, and what exactly do they offer?
Well, they're the 2 programs I'm currently producing and hosting for the ABC radio networks, which has been my home since 1991. The Rock and Roll's Greatest Hits show is a live Saturday night request party. It's a 5-hour show on the satellite, toll-free nationwide phone number. We do requests, we do contests every hour. We just are a party machine. Mm-hmm. And it's mid-60s to mid-80s is the music, and it has a theme every week. So we spotlight a particular group or artist or period of time or, a one-hit wonders type theme, something like that. And then American Gold is my countdown show. That was created originally as a counterpart to American Top 40. When I joined ABC in '91, they still had American Top 40.
Hosted by Shadow Stevens at that
time. Correct. And so they decided to launch an oldies version of that. And American Gold is the classic countdown show. And we have a license with Billboard magazine. We're exclusively licensed to use their actual chart numbers, positions, movements, and all of that kind of stuff. And so we count down topics. It's a 4-hour show every week. We'll count down, again, an artist or a group or a period of time. I just finished a show on the fall of 1974.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. You must have played I Honestly Love You, Nothing from Nothing, Then Came You, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet.
Those are all in the countdown.
There you go.
And the number one was You Haven't Done Nothing by
Stevie Wonder.
Yeah,
that was from Fulfilling This First Finale, I believe. Now, what are some of the big markets that are currently airing your shows right now, Dick?
Well, let's see. We're on about 250 stations between the two shows, and I probably shouldn't talk about. I'm not going to go into market specifics. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. We won't say
We
that.
have good tonnage. So.
Oh, yeah. Talking here with the multi-talented radio syndicated host, Dick Bartley. It's good to have him here. I had a question about at least the American Gold show. Great show, by the way, which I enjoy. Thanks. You'll be spotlighting, as you mentioned, a certain subject, such as the biggest hits of 1968 or girl groups. And instead of dedicating the entire show to, let's say, one or two subjects, you'll play other hits not related to the subject in the show. Why this way?
That's a better way, I think, to present balance, to present flow, to get people from point A to point B with as much mass appeal, attraction to the show as we can. I think if you take a particular countdown, say we're doing the fall of 1976, and there's a really good solid 12 songs, a dozen great songs from that period. Beyond that, you're starting to get records that didn't chart very high, that did have selective appeal, that not everybody remembers or likes or cares to hear. And I think if you get too deep, you have restricted the audience, the listening audience, to those people who, that small group of people who are already in love with that whole period of time, and would be happy to hear a record that charted at number 100 back in the fall of 1976. So, my goal has always been to make the show as widely appealing to the largest number of people as we possibly can. And one way to do that is to be specialized and expert, but not to pound them with a hammer and overdo it.
Sure, I understand that. I can read you on that one.
It's a delicate balance. I think any kind of programming is a delicate balance. I've always likened it to the guy on the Ed Sullivan Show who had to keep the 12 plates spinning. I think you're trying to make really knowledgeable music, intensive people for whom music is their life. You're trying to make them happy, as well as casual listeners and people somewhere in between. So it's a formidable task, I think, to program a music radio product to keep all of those constituencies happy.
Do you remember what the biggest hit was in the fall of '76? It spent 7 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard chart.
Had to be Rod Stewart.
Tonight's the Night.
Yeah.
Did you play Disco Duck by Rick Dees among your...
I have never played that record either as a current or as a recurrent
or
as a library title. Never have played it.
Oh, boy.
Well, I just, as a natural bent, I stay away from novelty records.
Trendy novelty records of the time. Yeah, exactly. I can understand
that. To me, that's not my cup of tea.
I understand. Put you on the spot here a little bit, Dick, and what are some of your favorite songs of all time?
I really do have so many. I don't think I could give you a top 3. I particularly like that that era from 67 to the mid-70s, maybe.
You know, that was the best time. I consider the best era 64 to 73. You couldn't lose with any year during that time.
Yeah.
You had the Beatles, you had the Supremes, you had the Stones. Along comes Elton John. So much great stuff. Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah.
So many great songs. And,
I was a fan of Light My Fire by the Doors. I was a fan of the whole Sgt. Pepper album. I remember I started buying LPs the previous year. My first album, no. Not first, but an early album in my collection was Rubber Soul,
sure,
which I loved, and so I would say I'm just a huge Beatles fan.
Okay.
But you know, there's so much great music of that period. I liked a lot of Motown records. I like Creedence Clearwater Revival. I love the Rolling Stones. A Three Dog Night. I've always been a big fan of their music.
They had the sound in the early 70s. The concerts they did.
They ought to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're one of the groups.
Aren't they?
No, and Chicago's not in, and the Moody Blues are not in.
Well, it's 25 years after your first single, but it's been more than 25 years for those guys.
They're way eligible.
Oh, gosh.
I don't think they've even been nominated.
Oh, I think they should be in there. There's no doubt.
But that's another whole story.
Now, how much, Dick, how much time do you put into your shows each week?
I put a full week in. I put in, because we're responsible for 9 hours of programming every week. The Saturday night show, of course, is done live, 7 to midnight, but I'm in the office, the studio, from 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoons preparing for that show. So there is pre-production, there's the delivery, and there's post-production on that show, including paperwork and providing music logs to affiliates who need ASCAP and BMI help. Support. But then we have the 4-hour show, the American Gold Show, which is a fully produced and scored and scripted radio show. And that takes about 4 days to produce that show. So it's a full week. I put in a full 6 days a week.
Now, if I could ask you, what are some of the sources that you use for compiling your information for your shows?
Oh, the Internet is the number one, of course, now. But when these shows were first launched, it was all, printed material, visiting the reference section of the local library, getting out microfilm, microfiche, going through old magazines and newspapers. As soon as the Internet became the monster source of information that it is today, it's really, I can get the bulk of what I need to produce a show from a dozen different websites.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You know? So.
You know what's so interesting is that you go on the Wikipedia and you can just find so many lists. Here's one list that I came up with recently before we take a break here. I've searched probably 12 or 15 different opinion polls of the greatest records ever made. All right, and I know Rolling Stone made one, the 500 greatest records, and then there were several other opinion polls, and I narrowed it down after looking at the average, the 6 greatest songs of all time, according to what I came up with, the average of all of these opinion polls I've seen, artists and media: Hey Jude, Stairway to Heaven, Good Vibrations, Respect, Like a Rolling Stone, and Can't Get No Satisfaction. Those are the 6.
I've got no problems with those.
Yeah, those are the 6 that I had come up with on the average for the great. Talking here with the multi-talented Dick Bartley, who hosts oldies shows that air around the country. Dick, I'd like to know, what is your opinion on syndication? Is it prosperous, do you feel?
Yeah, I think so. There's an awful lot of companies and individuals in the syndication business. I think it meets a very real need in the American radio landscape, and I think syndication offers, or should offer at its best, it should offer local radio operators tremendous advantages. In exchange for a small amount of inventory, you should get world-class radio that can really enhance the image of your station and uplift the quality of the program, make certain day parts very, very special, certain weekend day parts brings them to life. I think you can, if the syndication format matches, if the program format matches what you're doing or is close, I think you can really take advantage of it and use it to cross-promote other, attract an audience and cross-promote your morning show and your midday show and your afternoon show and other weekend things and remotes you might be doing, whatever. So, yeah, I think syndication meets a lot of needs. And I also think, particularly when we talk about nighttime and overnight and day parts like that, I think syndication is a great opportunity for cost-cutting, if nothing else, at the local level. So, yeah, I think it's a business that makes sense, and I think it meets a real need, and I'm proud to have been a part of radio syndication for 25 years now. How
do you get into radio syndication? How does a radio person who wants to go syndicated, how do you get into it?
Well, there's no book, obviously, on that. I mean, I think everybody who has come to the syndication business has a different path and a different expertise and many, many, many different stories to tell. I can only speak for myself. I came to it from local radio, and I really think the best program ideas came from the local scene. They were done on a local station. They were tested and tried and improved and tailored and perfected, hopefully, and then they got a shot at being a national show. I think that's the case whether it's talk or sports or music of multiple formats. I think you have to pay your dues if you want to sing the blues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go. Now, you use Billboard chart data on a lot of your shows. Talk about this. We were talking about it a little bit earlier.
Well, right now we're doing it on a kind of seasonal basis. So when I do a countdown, let's refer back again to the fall of 1974, there are 13 Billboard Hot 100 weekly charts that represent that season. Mm-hmm. And what I do, I have all the Billboard charts, mm-hmm. and I go back and take a look at the top 10, and I'll go through those 13 weeks, and I'll write down all the number ones and how long they were number one.
Sure.
And then all the records that peaked at number 2 and how long they were at number 2, and then all the records at 3 and 4 and so forth. And then you do a mathematical average of that, and you have a countdown of the season. But you have to be very careful with records that were late in the season and early in the season, because they may be considered by the listening audience. For instance, if a record was a hit in late summer, early fall of 74, it may be remembered as a summer record.
Like You're Having My Baby, or I Shot the Sheriff, or something
I Shot the Sheriff is exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah, and then late, if the record popped into the chart the last week in November, but really didn't peak until late December, January, or February, then it's going to be remembered as a winter record and not as a fall. So you have to do a little. I mean, there's editorial content. You have to take a look at the records, and every once in a while, a record will show up that isn't in the format anymore.
Right,
and you just toss it, because if the radio stations you're on are no longer playing that group or that artist or that particular record, out.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. I know American Top 40, of course, hosted by Kasem, they use Billboard data, of course, in the 1970s and 80s. Now, other countdown shows, such as Rick Dees' Weekly Top 40 show, and then Ryan Seacrest's current version of American Top 40 uses media-based 24/7. They don't even use Billboard data anymore because Billboard's chart is so diverse, and they've got so many different,
they got like 30 charts, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's something like that. Dick, how do you feel about radio in general today?
Too big a question. Why don't you narrow that down a little bit?
Okay, just we'll say pop music radio, music radio. We'll just say music radio. As you listen to music radio stations today, how do you look at those stations as a whole?
Well, I think they're very, very different from the golden age of top 40, as it were. Radio was inventing itself then, mass appeal radio. With the top 40 format and the jingles and the contests and the wacky DJs and the repetitive play of the top 10 and all of that. So I think the mold was broken back then. That kind of radio was of its place and time, tremendously appealing. The talent that came out of the golden top 40 era is just incomparable talent. And I think that it's a very different marketplace now. The young people, the target audience for, let's say, contemporary hit radio, has been raised. They're a computer generation, and they're way more than that. They're a gadget generation, and they are used to getting their music in very different ways.
iPods.
Downloads, file sharing, iPods. The old vinyl 45 and LP market is long gone into history. The CD, market may pass into history soon. So it's just a different world, and I do think that the contemporary hit radio stations of today are doing a very good job tuning themselves into and aligning themselves with the musical expectations of that particular audience. So I think it's healthy. It's just always changing. Radio, almost more than any other medium, is always changing, and you have to dial along with it. Yeah,
change with the times. Do you prefer to do a live show, such as your Request Oldies show on Saturday night, or do you prefer to tape it and send out the shows on CDs recorded?
I like them both, and that's why I do them both. I think they both have their advantages and disadvantages. I do think that the strong appeal of doing the live show, of course, is the immediacy of the contact with the audience and just the feeling that they're there, and you're either on track with them or you're not, and you better get on track with them. I like that, and so I like that immediate feedback. I also very much like the digital multi-track world because I'm a perfectionist, and it gives me a chance to make something absolutely perfect. And, get the perfectly edited interview clip and get the perfect comment for that particular song and the perfect music bed for that feature. And so it's an opportunity to really tweak and fine-tune and make something as perfect as we know how to make it. And, so they both have their place.
Absolutely. Now, if you had to pick one show or one moment in your Hall of Fame radio career that was your highlight, what would that be?
Probably meeting and interviewing Paul McCartney. ABC Radio Network had me do our Beatles anthology radio special. Back in '95, you recall, they started to release the anthology double CDs, and they had the multi-hour television show on ABC TV. And so I was picked to do the radio show, and as a part of that, got to go sit down with Paul and did a fairly extensive interview. Turned out to be probably the best interview I've ever had from the point of view of the expertise of the guy I was talking to. I mean, nobody's probably been interviewed more than Paul McCartney in his career. I mean, he's 40-plus years. He's heard every question a million times, and he has very good, thoughtful answers, and they really address all of the facets of the question, and he's well-spoken and intelligent and enthusiastic, and I was blown away. It was
I bet that had to be a
real
great
trip.
thrill.
And the radio show, of course, that came out of it reflected that, because it was all brand new material from McCartney, and it was, it was brilliant.
Speaking of Paul McCartney, he's done just about every interview. I've seen him interviewed recently. Larry King had a chance to sit down with both Paul and Ringo Starr.
Oh, yeah.
And the two, the wives of the passed away Beatles, and George Harrison and John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and I believe Cynthia Harrison. It was the Cirque du Soleil thing in Olivia. Okay.
Yeah, right.
The Cirque du Soleil thing in Las Vegas. Larry King interview. That had to be a great thrill for him. My guest here is legendary syndicated radio host Dick Bartley. Dick, let me ask you, how have you changed in your radio life and on the air in the last 25 years?
Well, 25 years ago, I was doing local radio, and I was doing, actually, a little more than that, probably. I was a program director at one point. I was a music director. I was doing on-air daily, Monday through Friday air shifts with a weekend air shift as well. Juggling all of those different things and trying to launch a network radio career as well. And gradually, the network part of my radio life took over the rest. And I went off local radio in 1984. I came back for about a year, maybe a little less than a year, in 1987 and did mornings at WNSR in New York City. I did, when they switched from, I think it was beautiful music format, to soft rock, New York soft rock. I was the morning man for a while on that station, while continuing to do a full 2-show or 3-show syndication load, and that was a little too much work.
I can imagine.
Was killing me. So.
Years later on WNSR, on that same frequency, Danny Bonaducci was the morning man on that station.
I forgot
that was
about
about 98 or something like that.
Yeah.
That was a. What makes a good syndicated personality, do you think?
I think expertise in the particular topic, the area you're in. You have to know it, and you have to love it, and you have to know what other people want to know about it in order to make the music appealing. I think you're filling in the cracks, between the blocks of stone there. You're the mortar, and everybody has access to the same songs in a library, but what you put between them, how you set them up, how you highlight them, put them in context, or reveal some interesting fact about them, is going to make that record shine or just go past again and be another airing of Mony Mony. You have to do something to make that very special music special. And so that's one thing a good host does. Another thing is to be as tuned in as they can be to what's going on in the lives of their listeners, so that the radio show reflects that, is about them, and as well as about the music or the period in time. Other than that, it's just, polish and professionalism and precision, that kind of stuff, the things you see on little work posters in your workplace,
Exactly.
It's just dedication to the job. You have to enjoy the job, and you have to be committed to it and passionate about it and willing to put in the hours, and
And it shows in your show. Why Connecticut is your base for your syndicated shows?
Well, when we moved from Chicago to join the RKO radio network full-time, they were down at 1440 Broadway. And for 2 years, in 1982 and 83, we did the Saturday night show from Chicago, from WFYR, and did a backhaul, satellite backhaul to New York, where they plugged the national spots in and then fed it out to the network. And so I guess they got tired of paying for the T1 and satellite backhaul charges, and they said, we want you to do another show, so why don't you just come on in here? And so they moved me to the New York area, and we just chose this area because it's a nice place to live, good school system. Both of my daughters went through the school systems here and have gone on to do quite well. So, you know, we're happy with our choice.
Westport, Connecticut is where I'm interviewing Dick Bartley here on this Friday, August 31st, having a wonderful time doing them. I'd like to get your opinions on the following radio personalities and syndicated hosts. Start with Howard Stern. Your thoughts on him?
Howard Stern is... you know, one of the headline guys of the last 20 years in syndication. I mean, just a huge factor in people thinking about radio. Not so much anymore, I guess, since he's been on the satellite. I think he's less in the headlines and such. But when he was doing that morning syndicated radio show, you know, 2-3 times a week, he would do or say something outrageous, and people would be all buzzing about, did you hear what Howard said today? And I think that was good for radio in general. Not that I, you know, would go down the path he went with content-wise, but the idea that he was making people sit up and pay attention and you know, think about radio and use radio as a place to get information and get entertainment and all of that. I think he was very valuable. And I'm really... The thing about satellite with it, you know, obviously he made a great deal. I mean, the guy's got to be very wealthy from this deal that he made with Sirius, but I just don't run into people that are listening to him on a regular basis. I really wish he were back.
I don't think the audience is there for him so
radio.
much on satellite as it was on regular radio, because a lot of people just don't want to take the time. They say, okay, well,
for
I can't hear him anymore.
Who knows what it is.
How about Don Imus?
Imus, I love to listen to. He was, of course, the flagship station here in the New York area, WFAN, and that's one of the buttons on my car radio because I listen to sports talk among many formats. And I listened to Imus for years and years and years. When I was very young, not even out of college and not full-time in the field yet, I was aware of Imus from a spread they did on him in Life magazine, and I'd heard him on the air, and then he had a couple of very funny record albums that he did that I remember some of his best radio bits were taped on. So I've been a fan of Imus for years. I think he's just an amazing talent who has created this little world, you know, the I-Man's world, where
there you go,
where it's like a throne he was on, looking down and commenting on politics, books, sports, personalities, whatever. And I'm sorry that he ran into the buzzsaw that he ran into.
But he may be back soon. Who knows?
I hope so.
How about legendary New York radio DJ Dan Ingram?
Dan Ingram is probably the greatest top 40 disc jockey of all time. A very funny man, just a wonderful, wonderful air talent. And I just, he's one of my idols. Casey Kasem is another, and Dick Clark, and
you're jumping ahead of me a little bit.
Well, those are just some of my favorite people. Ingram, I just think is the greatest, and I used to love particularly his double entendre titles. He had a way of twisting one letter or one word around in a title and making it almost borderline dirty. And of course it was expected of him, so he never got in trouble for it, and he got away with stuff that nobody else could.
You mentioned Casey Kasem. He's my hero in this business. You're one of my big heroes too, Dick. Casey Kasem. Talk about Casey.
Well, Casey, I think is just a legend. I mean, he invented the American Top 40 countdown. And the whole idea of the way he gets in and out of commercial breaks by teasing the next story and just leaving you hanging enough so you get through the commercials to get back to the show. I think he has a uniquely friendly and warm appeal and approach. I think he's a very socially conscious man. I think he has causes in mind that are deeply important to him, and he's committed to them, and I think that comes through. His integrity comes through. I really admire Casey. I think he's a terrific guy, and he's one of the people that I tried to emulate in my career. Tried to take certain facets of the way he did things, and of course make them my own. Sure. I'm not talking about parroting, but I think radio is made the way music is made. You learn from what you've heard growing up, and you take some of that and filter it through your own experience and make it your own. And so that's, he's one of the guys that I have admired.
Have you met Casey before?
Yeah, on several occasions.
Yeah.
We were at Westwood One Radio Network together for a couple of years.
Sure.
And I had Casey as a guest on my show. He used to do a lot of national promotion for MD. Mm-hmm. And so I had him on my local radio show in Chicago.
Great.
I did a nice interview one time, and a couple other occasions I've met him. I think probably at conventions and such.
Yeah, he's a wonderful man. There's no doubt about that. A couple other people here to talk about here in New York. One of the well-known programmers. He also worked in Los Angeles as well at Pirate Radio back in the late 80s and early 90s. Scott Shannon, your thoughts on him?
Well, Scott is a tremendous talent with a very long-lasting career, and he's, as you just pointed out, he's been through the reinvention of CHR. I really think when they go back and recount Scott's many accomplishments, I think he's probably going to get a lot of credit for the rebirth of CHR.
Especially in 1983 when Z100 came on the air, and then Kiss FM in Los Angeles, also a great top 40 radio station. What's your thoughts on Rick Dees?
Rick Dees is a marvelous talent. When I was program director of WFYR in Chicago, our morning man, Fred Winston, went across the street to WCFL, which they were trying to revive as an AM music station. So we had a morning vacancy, and I had to fill in on the morning shift for 2 or 3 months, and I'm not a morning guy. Mm-hmm. So I was anxious to get a major talent in there as soon as we possibly could, and Rick was available. He was between gigs. It was before KISS, and it was after KHJ or wherever he was before that. So I got his phone number from a friend, and I called, and he pretended to be a maid, and then he came on and he pretended to be a gardener. And then he finally, he went through a couple of voices with me.
Candid phone.
Yeah, and I told him we had this opening, and we had a very nice chunk of change to throw his way if he was interested, and the bottom line was he didn't want to leave Southern California.
Yeah, he first came there, I believe, came to Southern California here in 1979, and went to KISS in the early 80s. His countdown show, Weekly Top 40, started then. He's now on Movin' 93.9 in L.A., so he's been doing that for a little over a year now, so he's active. How about Ryan Seacrest? What do you think of him?
Don't know Ryan Seacrest's work, other than as the occasional spot I'll see him on television. I don't know anything about his radio work. So,
yeah, he's on KISS FM in Los Angeles. Of course, he's the American Idol host. Mm-hmm. He does E-News, and he's the current host of American Top 40.
Right.
And so, how about Bob Worthington?
Well, Bob replaced me at, which network was it? I think it was United Stations.
Okay.
When I left them and went to Westwood One, they plugged Bob into the Solid Gold Saturday Night Show. Bob was doing middays. Tape okay? Yeah, Bob was doing middays, and I was the morning man, so he followed me, and I worked with Bob for several months at WNSR in New York, and we always felt, and Bob came from the Chicago area, so we always felt that we sounded similar, and so obviously so did United Stations, because when I left that network, they plugged him right in, and a lot of people couldn't tell the difference in our voices. I thought Bob did an excellent job for many years on that show. I mean, he kept that show going another 10 years maybe.
Okay, that's
he did a great job.
Man, I interviewed recently on this program Gary Owens. On Gary Owens, and now the Laugh-In News.
Yeah, Gary's a great talent. I first discovered him on Laugh-In because I was not anywhere near any of the markets. I didn't grow up in the markets where Gary was on the radio. I knew him as the guy who cupped his ear and did all the funny stuff on Laugh-In, and then later found out that he had a thriving radio career both before and after Laugh-In, and hosted some syndicated radio as well, and was a very, very funny man. I admire people who are funny. Rick Dees, I think, is naturally funny too. I admire people who are just quick to the punchline, who think funny. Because it's something that I appreciate, but I don't do. It's not the way
I can understand what you're saying.
I get humor, I don't create humor.
I can certainly understand what you're talking about there. I wanted to talk about some of the awards that you've won. We've already talked about that you're in the Radio Hall of Fame. You've also been named one of America's most influential syndicated radio personalities, also Network Personality of the Year, and you've won a Billboard Radio Award as for Best Host and Producer. Which of these do you cherish the most, Dick?
Going into the National Radio Hall of Fame, without a doubt. The others were very gratifying, and I'm proud to have been, thought of and nominated, let alone awarded these things. But I think going into the National Radio Hall of Fame is one of those deals where it's your peers who put you in. It's the people who are in the business with you and respect and, recognize the contribution that you've made to the biz. So that was a real highlight. I'll never forget. Chuck Negron of Three Dog Night was the guy who inducted me. He very graciously agreed to come to the big awards ceremony.
Which songs did he sing on for Three Dog Night? Was he the lead vocalist on?
Most of them. Okay. One, Joy to the World. Those are Chuck leads.
How about Black and White?
Probably. Although Danny brought that song to the group, so he might be the lead on that.
Okay, and then their other number one, Mama Told Me Not to Come, which, by the way, was American Top 40's first number one song in 1970.
There you go. I don't think Chuck sang the lead on that one. I think that was actually Corey.
Okay.
He did the talking thing on that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Anyway, Chuck did the induction speech, and I got to, hear a little 2-minute montage of my whole radio life pass before my eyes, and then, give a little thanks. My daughters and my wife were at the table with me, and some dear friends, so I got to acknowledge them, and it was a wonderful experience.
The National Radio Hall of Fame, and that's just where you belong, Dick. There's no doubt about it. Wanted to kind of quiz you a little bit here. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left here. Just quiz you. Let's see how, off the top of your head, see if you remember. Billboard's number one song for 1967. You remember what it was, off the top of your head? 1967.
So it would have to be multi-week number one. I would say To Sir With Love.
Got it.
Yeah.
How about 1968, biggest hit of that year?
68. Hey Jude.
Ah, there
Runaway,
you go. 69, number one song of that year.
There were several that were multi-week number ones. I would say the one that was the number one the longest was probably in the year 2525, but I can't see that as being number one for the year.
Wasn't number one for the year. I'm gonna make your life so sweet.
Oh, no kidding. Sugar. Okay, yeah, and my buddy Ron Dante, who was just a wonderful guy, very talented, still doing lots of great music shows. He's got a great show tomorrow.
1970, biggest hit of 1970.
Oh, had to be Bridge Over Troubled
There you
Water.
Go. 71, you talked about it a minute ago.
Joy to the World.
72.
Let me see.
Slow and Mellow.
Is it Roberta Flack?
Yeah, first time. How about 73?
Oh, Not Killing Me Softly, first time, yeah.
Yeah, 73. Number one of that year.
Oh, boy.
True story.
I could probably tell you 12 number ones from that year, but not the number one for the year.
Tie Yellow Ribbon around the old
okay.
Now, 74 had a ton of number one records. Had like 36 of them.
Yeah.
And Billboard's number one for 74. You remember?
No. You tell me.
Memories.
Oh, good grief. The Way We Were, which I even view as a 73 record, because I think we played that before the turn of the calendar. So.
And then how about 75? Husband and Wife Duo.
Captain and Tennille.
There you go.
Sure.
76, Billboard's number one, although Tonight's the Night in the calendar year was the biggest hit, but Billboard, because it fell late in the year, it couldn't name it the number one record.
Oh, really? I was going to guess Tonight's the Night.
Yeah. So. It was Silly Love Songs.
Oh, okay.
For 76.
No problem with that.
And 77, 10 weeks at number one in the fall, although Billboard was too late. Billboard couldn't name it number one for the year.
What, Night Fever or Staying Alive? Or
that was 78. 77, Daughter of a Radio Legend.
Debbie Boone, another record that I don't have in my library right now.
But that was big. That was the biggest chart of the 70s.
It was huge. It was huge, and it sold records to people who didn't ordinarily buy records. So.
How about today's music? Like, do you keep up with, like, number one song in the country early September here in 2000, well, late August, early September in 2007, Fergie, Big Girls Don't Cry. Do you listen to that kind of the current
I heard that on the radio yesterday, but I have to be honest with you, I do not track contemporary music as much as I once did. I think that contemporary music is is addressed to and covers the needs and the wants and the lifestyles of a younger audience than I am, and therefore it's not targeted to me. It's not speaking to me. So there are a lot of songs I hear that I like, but I don't live and die by the weekly chart as I once did.
Do you remember what the Billboard's number one of '56 was? Going way back to that.
I really don't, but I mean, I would guess that it was Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, but because that was number one for 11 weeks.
Yeah, Heartbreak Hotel.
Okay, well, that was number one for whatever, 9 or 10 weeks.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. So now, did you ever play on your show one of my favorites from '57? I hear the cottonwoods whispering.
Oh yeah, Tammy. Sure,
great record.
Yeah, I played that as an oldie.
How about
back in the day?
Number one song of 1960, number one for 9 weeks, an instrumental.
Oh, Theme from a Summer Place.
There you go. How about 61?
61.
Indianapolis.
I would guess Runaway. Or Tossin' and Turnin'.
There you go.
All right.
62, another instrumental. Billboard's number one.
I'll have to say my number one for 61, though, was the Elvis double-sided hit, Marie's the Name and Little Sister.
There you go. Great record. Number one for 62, also an instrumental. The first British act.
Oh, Telstar.
No. They were the first British group, but the first British act to hit number one on the Billboard chart.
Ackerbilk?
There you go.
All right.
And 63 was How There's a Crazy Little...
Oh, yeah, Sugar Shack, Jimmy Gilmer. Sure, I bought that record. I think it was on Dot. I'm trying to remember the label. Yeah.
And 64...
That's right when I started buying 45s.
Okay.
I bought Surfin' USA by the Beach Boys in 63. I bought Do Ron Ron by the Crystals that year. I bought the Sugar Shack record, and I bought Pipeline by the Shantays. I think that was 63. So that's when I started buying 45s.
Cool. And then 64, you know what the number one record of the year was?
Oh, and Hold Your Hand.
There you go.
Had to be.
65 didn't hit number one. During
Wooly Bully is what they have. In my mind, Satisfaction is clearly the runaway number one of that year.
And 66, one of those kind of novelty type records.
Winchester Cathedral?
No. Fighting Souls.
Oh, Barry Sadler.
That was number one for 66.
Talk about a record that was of its place and time.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That was certainly what. Mm-hmm. All right, one last question here, Dick. It's so good to be talking to you here. Dick Bartley is my guest here, the great radio syndicated host who's in the National Radio Hall of Fame. Dick, wanted to ask you, where is radio and syndication headed, in your opinion?
Well, radio, the definition has changed over the past 5 or 10 years. To include any place you get information, spoken information, and music. So, the definition of radio is changing practically every day. You've got, in addition to regular radio stations, you've got satellite, you've got streaming, you've got iPods, you've got music downloads to your phone, you've got... you name it, the function that radio has served for all these years is now kind of being handled by a number of different media. So radio obviously is an important part of our lives, and it is reinventing itself as we go along. We live in a very gadget-heavy, digitally techno era, and so I think radio is adapting to that. I think radio is looking at HD. I think radio is looking at all kinds of ways to make itself more useful with side channels and streaming of information about the songs you're hearing and whatever. I think radio is keeping up with the times. I think there's always going to be a need for portable music and information. I don't think anything's ever going to take the place of hearing your local forecast and the local traffic during the morning commute and your local news. So I think that, radio is a living, breathing, vital part of every community that it's in.
My guest has been Dick Bartley, the great syndicated radio host. And Dick, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with me.
My pleasure. You're very welcome.